I'm really excited for this session because I'm just a huge fan of Jhana Li, who is here on the session with us today. When it comes to hiring, training, and managing operations leadership, she's truly one of the most dialed in people that I know because she is so close to it. And this is not a knock on other coaches and consultants, but a lot of people transition to that after they've had a career in business, and then sometimes many years go by and they haven't really been in the weeds. But Jhana has the experience running operations and scaling businesses and is still very much in touch with what it means to do that day to day. And so it's the ability to talk about the concepts, but get into the tactics. I just admire that about you. So Jhana, I'm incredibly excited that you're here. And I want to, of course, make sure that you have an opportunity here to describe what you do and who you serve for everyone that's not already a fan.
Amazing. Well, and I have equal, if not more, nice things to say right back to you in terms of, and guys, you all know how incredible Marcel is. So I'm super, super excited that we teamed up to do this and combine our superpowers and our knowledge to the benefit and to the value of everybody on this call. Guys, super quick, if you don't know me, my name is Jhana Li. The name of my company is Spyglass Ops, and I'm a former multi-time COO. And so I got into this, like Marcel said, not by being an entrepreneur and coaching other people how to do it, but by just doing it and understanding what it really takes to operationalize and manage a growing remote startup. And so with multiple successful startups under my belt, with a coaching program where I was able to coach 500 plus digital business owners, I gathered all this data, I learned all this stuff about operations, and I eventually started my own business. And this is what we do. We help entrepreneurs scale their companies through operations and getting the right operator, the right second in command in the role and on the team so that they can create that operational change in the business.
And with all of that, I'll briefly introduce myself as well, because maybe there's some people here from your network, Jhana, that have never
I recognize
heard
a
of
few.
me either. Okay, great. Well, my name is Marcel. I'm basically just a guy that talks into a camera for a living. And what I generally talk about is helping professional services and consulting businesses, agencies, measure and improve their profitability. So I run a company called Parakeeto. That is what we do. We have tons of content on the internet teaching people how to do this stuff. And we also do consulting and sell software to that end as well. So what I'm really excited about today is how Jhana and I are going to be able to cover both sides of the equation as it relates to how to actually integrate data into leadership and get those things working together in the business. Because for those of you that have experienced trying to integrate scorecards and metrics and data in the business, it sounds very straightforward at the high level, but there's a lot of nuance to both the quantitative side of actually measuring what's happening in the business and then actually getting the team bought in, having actions and improvements and understanding and buy-in occur in the business. And so I'm going to cover part of the quant side of that. Jhana can talk to the qual side of that, and together we can close the loop. And so with all of that in mind, we're going to spend a few minutes. I'll open this up with a framework. Jhana will speak to some things as well. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A, and I'll describe the rules of engagement for Q&A later as well. So with that, let me share my screen and do what I do, which is draw largely illegible things on my iPad as a way to present things. For those of you that have not seen me present before, my handwriting's terrible. So let me just preface this by saying that why I chose to present information this way is a mystery to everyone, including myself, but this is what I chose to do. So you're going to have to pay very close attention. And maybe that's the benefit of all of this in the end. So I want to describe for a moment what we call the agency profitability flywheel. So this is our point of view on, at the highest level, how do you take the process of improving the efficiency of the business and architect it into the DNA of the business? And from my perspective, it comes down to having two important feedback loops that work together to drive action in the business. And so that first feedback loop is a function of taking assumptions, or what I often call the plan, and structuring those in such a way that it's clear what we're planning for and that everybody can get aligned and get an understanding of what that is. And so I'll give you a simple example of this. I talk to a lot of agencies every day, and when I ask them, hey, if everybody on your team was perfectly utilized, took all their time off, all your projects were on time and on budget, what would the outcome be for your business? How much money would you make? How much profit would you have? What would your utilization rate be? And most people don't actually know how to answer that question. They've never done the math to figure out, like, based on the people that we've hired, how much we pay them, how many hours they work, what are we actually setting ourselves up for here in the first place? And that seems pretty important, because without understanding what's possible, how are you going to set targets? How are you going to create buy-in and alignment? How are you going to make sure that the objectives that you have for the business are aligned to what you're actually capable of achieving? So first thing is, let's get clear on what are we planning for in the first first place. And then we want to measure actuals. So we thought we were going to do this much in revenue. We made this much actually. We thought we were going to be this utilized. We were this utilized actually. We thought our projects were going to be this profitable. They were that profitable actually. So we track what actually happened. We identify where the gaps are, and the gaps are usually where the opportunity is in the business. Either things went way worse than we thought, so let's double click on that, find out why, or things went way better than we thought. Let's double click on that and see if we can replicate that outcome in the business. And this is what we think about as the quantitative feedback loop, right? So this is the first critical thing, is just this very objective, nobody can argue with it. This is what happened. And from there, the really important thing that we need to do is we can't just stop at quant. I just shared this with Jhana before the call, and I'll share it with all of you. A thing we say all the time at Parakeeto is the data can only tell us what the data is, but it can't tell us why the data is. And this is a mistake we see people make all the time. We try to measure things to such a degree of fidelity that we can try to infer reasoning from the data. So we try to get all the way to a determination of what's happened and why by looking at numbers, but that's often a trap. It A, will make reporting much more complicated, and B, it will often infer things that are or aren't true. And what it doesn't do is a lot of the important things that actually lead to action, which is create buy-in and understanding. And so that's where we want to make sure we have reports and meetings architected into the business where these quantitative feedback loops are able to be discussed with the right people. And out of those discussions will come actions, hopefully actions that are volunteered by the people who need to be accountable to them. Those actions should lead to more clarity and consistency around the plan and the assumptions, which should lead to more alignment between the plan and actuals, which should lead to more nuanced insights. And you see, this is the feedback loop that leads to scale and profit in the business. And this second feedback loop, this is, of course, more of a qualitative feedback loop. So at a high level, that's the big idea behind how we think about the relationship between data and leadership and operation in the business and how it leads to successful outcomes. So I can spend some time talking about the numbers, but before I do that, I want to turn it over to Jhana to kind of briefly talk about what it means to really create that buy-in and nail the qual side of this equation. So with that, John, over to you.
Amazing, Marcel. Yeah, I'm excited to toss back to the numbers in just a moment with a couple of pieces of important context in mind here, because I always say data for the sake of data is useless. Data is only as good as the actions that are taken from it, as the decisions that are made from it. So you could have the most perfect data infrastructure in the world, but if nobody is looking at those numbers, if nobody is taking action based off of those numbers, it is as good as useless. And so how do we get our team bought in around data? And how do we use data, which is normally something very kind of inhumane, right? It's just cold, hard numbers. And how do we humanize it to actually bring maximum performance out of our team? And there's essentially 4 major pillars that I see that data can and should be layered into how we lead our team so that we are using data to unlock highest levels of human potential. Those pillars, and I'll cover them in depth, are ownership, alignment, autonomy, and trust. So the first one is ownership, right? Why is data so powerful? Because it's one thing for a team member to have numbers. It's another thing for a team member to look at those numbers. And it is a third thing altogether for that team member to feel a sense of ownership over those numbers. What we take ownership in as human beings, we have pride in. We own it. It's ours. So I'm going to be thinking about that on the weekends. I'm going to be generating new ideas and coming up with creative new ideas about how I can move the needle on those numbers. I'm going to be diving deeper and doing research on my own time into how other people are moving the needle on those numbers because it's mine. And if I feel that sense of ownership, then I will show up to it with a sense of ownership. And so my first question is, when you create this beautiful data dashboard, when you know what numbers are important, have you transferred ownership over those North Star metrics to your team? Does every single member of your team not only understand how to read the data and how to analyze it, but do they feel a sense of ownership over the North Star metric that is specific to their role? Because they probably won't feel ownership over company-wide revenue, right? If I am a VA on the bottom of the rung, I'm not feeling ownership for revenue. But what I might feel ownership is number of positive responses from the cold emails that I send every day. That's a North Star metric that I can attach myself to and take pride in. So making sure that we're very clear, what is the North Star metric of every single role, and have we transferred ownership of that to that individual? And what that creates is number 2, I'll actually jump down to autonomy. Because if I understand now what success looks like in my my role. I can now be free to innovate and create on how I'm going to get there. So if my job is to increase number of positive responses to cold email, that's my North Star, then I can actually exercise autonomy. And autonomy is how we get highest levels of creativity and performance from our team. And I can start bringing to the table, well, what if I tweaked the script like this? Well, let me dive a little bit deeper into the data over here. Do we get a higher response rate if I send it during certain times of day? I can now apply myself and take a higher degree of critical thinking and ownership and autonomy because I understand what success looks like in my role. But I always say, no A player, doesn't matter how good they are. No one can run a race if you don't tell them where the finish line is. And that North Star metric per role is the finish line per role. And giving people a finish line to run towards now gives them clarity around how they can run that race. And that brings us to the third core pillar. That pillar is alignment. If you've done your data correctly, not only do we have the actuals of here's what's happening, but we can actually compare that against a plan, against here's what should happen. And if we've constructed that plan correctly, then every North Star across every role being hit by every person should guarantee our outcome. Meaning if our marketing VA hits their targets and our marketing manager hits their targets and our marketing director hits their targets, then our CMO should hit their targets, then our business should hit their targets, right? That data cascades upwards because everybody is achieving their individual objectives. So what you've created just by structuring and thinking through your data correctly is alignment. You can guarantee that the marketing VA all the way over here that you never talk to is still doing the right work. They're still doing the work that is going to move the business forward. You can trust and measure that because you've created this cascading data with all these different layered North Stars. And you can guarantee that everyone, by hitting their individual North Stars, will move the business in the right direction. So one of the hardest things to scale out is alignment when there's so many people on your team that you can't individually check in on everybody every single day and make sure that they're doing the right thing. Data is one of those ways of creating alignment at scale. And that brings us to the fourth and final pillar here, which is trust. I always say intuition is not scalable. And so you've probably been running your business, or at least you started running your business purely off of intuition. And that worked really well because you're the business owner with your finger on the pulse. You know exactly what's going on and you can make the right intuitive decisions to lead the business forward. But your team doesn't have all the context. And even if they did, let's be honest, you don't trust their intuition. You trust yours. And so if you want to be able to trust your team, if you want to be able to start handing off decisions to them and to be able to trust them and do that confidently, then to know that they're making decisions based off of numbers and not off of their gut, and to be able to measure whether those decisions actually move the business forward or not, gives you the ability to trust your team. Because we would all love to trust our team. But when it comes to making the most important decisions for the business, can we? Not unless we know that they're making data-based decisions in the same way that we would. So these four core elements of leadership get unlocked when you use data appropriately. And again, those are ownership, autonomy, alignment, and trust. Marcel, back to you. Any thoughts on this?
Ownership, autonomy, alignment, and trust.
And trust.
I wrote them down. I love those. And they're so relevant to what I'm about to share. There's two things that I want to tack on to this. The first is something that you mentioned. I've been talking about this a lot recently. So this is just me indulging an idea that I think is really cool. You'll all have to let me know in the chat if this is actually a cool idea.
Or if we're just fully nerding out here.
It's a simple idea, but we're all trying to get to insight. And ultimately, we're all trying to get to action. And I've observed something really, really interesting in the firms that we're working with is when someone's having a challenge in their business, in our case, it's usually related to profitability, but this could be anything. We're not getting the growth that we want. We're not hitting whatever KPIs that we're looking for in the business. We're not feeling like we're getting the results that we want. We often jump to one side of the equation for getting insight, which is the actuals, right? What is actually happening? So we look to finance for a profitability problem. Let's go pour more money into our accounting. Let's get that to be more dialed in detail. Let's roll out time tracking. Let's get everybody tracking their time. Let's measure how much time is getting spent on all of these tasks. And we end up with all of this data. We start measuring the KPIs that we Google, and some blog post on Parakeeto.com tells us we should track, or we talk to other entrepreneur friends and find out what metrics they're tracking. And then we end up with a result. And I hear this all the time. It's like, yeah, so we know what our utilization rate is. We know what our profitability is, but we're still not feeling confident and clear about the action that we're taking. And the insight becomes because we don't actually know if this was a failure of execution or if we plan to fail from the start and we just weren't aware of it. So without understanding both the plan and the actuals, we can't diagnose the issue, right? Okay, your utilization rate is 50%. Well, is that because you had enough work to do, but for some reason the team didn't do that much work? Or is it because you didn't have enough work to do in the first place? Is that because your utilization ceiling is 70%, but you only resource to 50? Or is it because your utilization ceiling is actually 45% and you're not even aware that your target is outside the bounds of what's possible for you? Without that clarity, we can't get enough insight to actually take action because we don't know what the problem is. We can't get aligned around what is happening and then work together as a team to get this done. So this is a really important thing that you touched on, Jhana, but I really want to drive it home. And here's a pop quiz for you all. Given the choice, if both of these things are not in place, right? So let's say you have an area of your business that you're not doing a good enough job of measuring. Let's take profitability as that example. If you have both a gap in terms of your actuals and a gap in terms of your plan, where do you start? What's the first thing that you should look to install given the choice? Because we have a process at Parakeeto, I'm sure you could imagine, if a client comes in, they don't have any of this, we have a starting point, and there's a very deliberate reason why we start there. Most people start with the actuals. And I would say that's because it's the thing that we're all talking about in the industry. It's the more obvious thing to do. And in a lot of cases, you already have them. Like you have to do finances because you'll go to jail if you don't. But then you'll be like, oh, let's start tracking time, etc. Here's my belief. We always start by clarifying the plan, and then we work to clarify the actuals. And there's a few reasons for that. The first is starting with the plan is significantly less expensive, requires far less change management, generally requires far less latency to get insight, because generally clarifying the plan does not require net new information. It's just a question of taking the assumptions we're already making about the business and structuring them in such a way that we can see what is the outcome that we are planning for. And that's different than measuring actuals, which a lot of times requires new tools, new processes, changes to existing tools and processes, and some amount of time that we need to elapse for us to collect the data to then get an insight. So let's say, for example, it's time tracking. How long does it take you to go evaluate a time tracking tool, choose it, sign up for it, roll it out to your team, train them on it, manage towards compliance, and then collect enough data to actually answer the question that you originally set out to answer? I mean, is that 6 months? Is that 8 months? Is that 12? It's certainly not tomorrow. Whereas if the question is, hey, we're not hitting our utilization target, but like, what is the maximal utilization that we could hit? You don't need any new information to answer that question. You just need to sit down and write every single person on your team out, how many hours a week they're hired for, how many you expect to be on client work, and do the math. You can get that answer today. And guess what? There is no amount of tracking actuals that will fix the problem of we're planning to fail and we don't know that we're doing it. So from my perspective, we always start with the plan because it's faster, it's cheaper, and it will capture the low-hanging fruit. And there's not really that much value in tracking actuals until we have a relative basis here. And often we can solve the vast majority of our problems by planning for success. And then we'll really understand where we need to make these investments when we start to identify, hey, there are some obvious places where what we think is going to happen is not what's happening. So let's make the investments to double click on that. So hopefully that's insightful just in terms of the sequencing.
I'm going to add one more thing in, and then maybe we open it up to Q&A, Marcel. So I had a mentor once that told me that at any given point in time, you're viewing your business through one of three lenses. You have the satellite lens. The satellite lens is the 30,000 foot lens. That is the executive level. We are looking at this entire freaking business as a whole big picture lens. You have the helicopter. The helicopter is your 300 foot view. That's where you're looking at just America. You're looking at just a piece of the puzzle, but you're able to get this kind of big picture view around just this department or just this component. And then the bottom layer is the microscope. That is your individual frontline layer. And this was such a powerful realization for me because I realized that data actually needs to reflect each of these three layers within the business. So if we were to take cost per lead as an example, right? Cost per lead, let's say you're an agency and you run ads for clients and you're tracking cost per lead. The same metric, cost per lead, means something radically different at the microscope versus helicopter versus satellite level. At the microscope level, we're looking at the individual cost per lead for an individual ad account for an individual client. And that is what your frontline media buyer should be looking at because that's their scope. They are looking at your business through the microscope all day, every day. If we were to layer that up to the helicopter, we're looking at average cost per lead per media buyer. So it's still the same data, but we're aggregating it differently so that our head of media buyers, our manager, our department lead can look at their team as a whole and ask themselves a fundamentally different question, which is which of my team members is performing the best, the worst, where are they overstretched, where do they need support? Same piece of data, but radically different questions to be answered. And then if we were to dial that up to the satellite level, again, average cost per lead, still the same piece of data, but now we're looking at that on YouTube versus Facebook and using those analytics to make a totally game-changing decision about our product and which channel we're going to double down on. Same piece of data, radically different question. So when it comes to the plan, what I most often see is that people build a plan at the satellite level and then they stop. They're like, all right, we're going to have this plan with these really big picture, high level level metrics around where the business needs to go and what it's going to take in order to get there. Fantastic, by the way. That's where we need to start. The plan has to start at the satellite. But then where we failed to cascade it down is into the helicopter level and then the microscope level. And like we just talked about, you can't recognize and realize the full benefit of data unless your entire team is on board and it's serving to create ownership, alignment, autonomy, and trust across the entire team. So by all means, build your plan at the satellite level, but then reverse engineer down what target needs to be. If our satellite is this average cost per lead on YouTube and Facebook, then what does our average cost per lead need to look like per media buyer? Great, that's the North Star metric for our manager. Now, what does that have to come down to? An average cost per lead per ad account. Great. That's the North Star metric for our frontline media buyer, right? So cascading the metrics down, cascading the plan down so that you're creating a North Star metric at each layer of the business that is within the control of the person who operates at that layer of the org chart, so they can take ownership for it, so they can create alignment around it. And recognizing that this same number needs to be displayed in 3 radically different ways for the frontline media buyer to be able to answer their question versus your CMO to be able to answer their question. Same piece of raw data, but totally different displays so that you can create this system-wide, this team-wide rollout and get the maximum effect. Thoughts on that, Marcel?
My thought is that we have 3 minutes before we're scheduled to go to Q&A, and I have to double click on this because it's such an important idea. So there's 2 thoughts here that I want to drive home with everyone. The first thing that you mentioned, and I want to put a practical example behind this, is that different people in the organization have different questions that they need to answer. And the mistake that we see so often, and it's reflected here, right, is we hire one metric and then everybody in the organization is hiring that metric to answer different questions. And instead of answering one question accurately, we then end up with a metric that's answering 5 questions inaccurately. Let's use utilization as a practical example in an agency. The finance director and the owner of the company, they want to answer the question of how much of the labor that we pay for as an organization gets utilized to earn revenue. So if we want to calculate utilization to answer that question, we're looking at gross capacity. We would not strip out time off. We would not strip out holidays, and we would only look at delivery time. And that would tell us, after we incur the cost of time off and holidays and sick time and all the internal time, what percentage of the time that we pay for actually gets used to earn revenue. And that's probably going to be a much lower number than, for example, a project manager who's trying to answer the question of what percentage of the available time for client work is being resourced against client projects. And they would calculate it based on their idea of capacity would be someone's capacity after we take out all the time off and the holidays and the internal time, like what's left over just for client work and what percentage of that am I utilizing as a project manager on resourcing. It's a different question and the metric is different. But if we have one concept of utilization, we're not even speaking the same language. But the problem is most organizations, they're figuring out that that's a problem when they're talking to me on a sales call for the first time. They're going, oh shit, yeah, you're right. We're all speaking different language. We're all thinking about this differently. This is why we're having this argument in meetings about, I think the target should be this percentage and they think it should be that percentage. And we're not even actually talking about the same thing. So that's a big idea. And the second big idea here is the concept of structured versus unstructured data, where another mistake that we see people make is there are certain metrics that you're going to have to calculate frequently, and you're going to need to have that data be structured. So let's say, for example, a question that we want to answer at the executive level is, what is our cost per lead by channel across these 4 channels? What is our cost per lead for YouTube versus Facebook? Well, what that means is for every lead, we need a piece of metadata, and that metadata needs to be, did this come from YouTube or did it come from Facebook? And we need to have a process to clean that up, because if there's 17 different variants that emerge over 6 months of a lead that comes from YouTube, because our UTM parameters are all over the place, right? So you guys get the idea. Everything needs to get consolidated to YT or FB. And that is something that needs to be perfect all the time for that report to be accurate. And when we start to try to create structured data down to the helicopter and especially the microscope level, there is an exponential increase in the cost, operational drag, and risk of trying to create structured data at those levels. So for example, if now we get to the microscope and we say, we need to understand the CPL for a single ad account, and we know that we're going to have 400 ad accounts over the course of the next year, but we can't make mistakes on that. It has to be perfect in order for this report to be reliable. But guess what? We only ever double click on an ad account twice a month when we see that there's like a massive red flag. That's like saying, I'm going to wear my tuxedo every day in case there's a wedding, instead of saying, I'm going to keep my tuxedo in the closet and I'm just going to put it on when there's a wedding. It takes me an extra 10 minutes, right? right? But what we don't end up dealing with is the cost of trying to maintain a rigid data structure through the entire operation of the business. So you have to be very considerate about where are we creating these very rigid data structures that need to be perfectly maintained over time because we're trying to create very automated, very streamlined reporting. And where is it okay to make sure the metadata exists, but it doesn't have to be perfect and we can spend an extra 10 minutes to do the data munging, but it's a question that is going to be answered every once in a while. And I would urge you to resist creating structured data and try to keep the amount of structured data that you build in the business at a minimum until you have a recurring pattern where it's like, hey, we spent 3 hours this month building this report. Okay, now it's time to make that investment if it's feasible. It's so easy to underestimate the operational cost and risk of trying to structure everything. And the worst thing that you can do is create a report that is structured, but that's not feasible to maintain. So you never have accurate data when you look at it, and then everyone learns not to trust it in the first place, and then you've completely defeated the purpose. So it's a big idea, but I just thought it was worth sharing. Is that helpful, guys? Let me know in the chat, or did I just waste the last 3 minutes? Turn it into 6 minutes.
And on the topic of dropping things in the chat, super helpful. Thanks, Mark. We appreciate the validation. Go ahead, start dropping your questions. Oh, Marcel, you've got some rules of engagement when it comes to Q&A.
I do.
How can we best structure this?
Here's how we do Q&A in Parakeeto land. First of all, I want to invite everyone to turn your cameras on because we show love to each other when we do Q&A. And the way that we do that is through a virtual round of applause. And the way that we do a virtual round of applause is we put our fingers up to the camera and we do this. So I want to invite everyone to give a virtual round of applause to Jhana Li. Right? We transfer some positive energy. How good does this feel? When someone comes up to ask a question, which is a very brave thing to do on a webinar like this, at the end, I'm going to invite everyone to transfer some positive juju. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you would like to come up and ask a question, I want to invite you to use the reactions button in Zoom, and there's a little raise hand button. That'll do this, and it will tell us that you want to come up and ask a question, and then we will summon you to ask a question. You will go ahead and unmute yourself, and the first thing that you're going to do is just introduce yourself using our perfect introduction framework, which is, I'll type it in the chat, I help X do Y. We don't need to know what year your company was founded in, how many employees you have, what your background is. We'll keep it simple, short and sweet. Hi, I'm Marcel. I help agencies measure and improve profitability. And then proceed with your question. You can address it to Jhana, to myself, to the audience, to whatever, and we'll keep it to one question at a time. If you have more than one, it's no problem, but we just ask that we keep it to one at a time so that everyone has an opportunity to come up. Is everybody on board with that? Give me some spirit fingers if you're ready to rock and roll. Amazing. Okay, we got some jazz claps. I love it. Okay, so Keegan is quick to the gun. You were locked and loaded, Keegan, so come on down, introduce yourself, and take it away with your question.
Well, first off, thank you guys for doing this. This was super insightful and action-packed. My name's Keegan, and I help remodelers close more deals, kitchen and bath remodelers. My question, I was wondering if you could go a little bit deeper into an example of structured versus unstructured data, because I was having a hard time understanding that.
Yeah, great question. I'll give you a simple example, which is like, think about your accounting tool. So when you get your P&L out of QuickBooks, you have a chart of accounts, and in that chart of accounts, you're probably going to have something like a software account, a payroll account, maybe licenses and dues and fees accounts, an admin fees account. So that would be an example of structured data, where for me to run my P&L each month, I need to have a piece of metadata on every transaction that tells me which of these accounts does it belong to. We have an accountant on the call right now, Laura. We have at least one accountant on the call. And I know Kathy does a lot of accounting stuff too, right? So they know what we're talking about here. So that would be an example of structured data. We need to make sure that every transaction from this point forward to be allocated to one of those accounts. If we don't do that, then the report is not accurate. So that now becomes a criteria of completion. Whereas if, for example, you wanted to answer the question of how much money did we spend on video conferencing software last year? Well, are you going to create an account on your P&L in the chart of accounts that is specific to video conferencing software? Well, probably not if that's a question that you might ask randomly every year or two. What instead you might do is go in, export a bunch of transactions, build a pivot table, maybe run a couple of filters. Like, it takes 5 minutes. You can still get the answer because the metadata exists. But what you're not going to do is create now a set of structured data that you have to be militantly compliant on forever for this question that is not necessary to have an answer to all the time, that you're actually going to be the cost benefit of measuring that every once in a while and spending a little extra time, you're way out ahead on that. So does that kind of clarify the question, Keegan?
That makes a lot of sense. And I can already see it in my own agency and how we do that in other ways. So thank you.
Add to that, if you're trying to make a decision of like, does this data point deserve to be structured or can we leave it unstructured, is ask yourself two things. Number one, how frequently do we ask a question that this metric will answer, right? Because if we're asking this question every single week, every single day, then it probably pays dividends to just have the system that is accurate so we don't have to run that manual report every week or every day. So one of them is frequency. And then the other one is impact. Not all metrics are equally valuable. They don't all answer equally valuable questions. And so the question, if you're asking yourself, hey, does this metric need to be structured or does this question need to be structured? How valuable is it to the business to have an accurate answer to that question? Or does a once a month gut check get us pretty much like that's a good enough way of actually answering that question, right? So asking yourself those two questions, it's frequency, how often do we ask this question, and value. How valuable is it for us to have an 100% accurate answer to that question?
Thank you.
Great question.
So I want to invite everyone again, use the reactions button. If you'd like to come up and ask a question, you can raise your hand. That'll tell us that you've got a question. And while I wait for that, I'll add one more tidbit, I guess, on this concept of structured versus unstructured data, which is generally when you're creating structured data, you want to err on the side of larger, broader, but accurate buckets as opposed to more precise buckets. So an example of this, let's say you're setting up a time tracking tool. I would rather you set up 5 major buckets of design, project management, engineering, QA, and make sure that every piece of time tracking data falls into one of those 5 buckets, then set up 25 buckets that tries to differentiate between UX design, UI design, graphic design, whatever. And then what you end up with oftentimes is bad data compliance. So when your designer goes to log a task, they're like, which of these 6 buckets do I put it in? You end up with inconsistencies. It's hard to understand. You end up with very fragmented data that doesn't actually tell you a whole lot. There's like a bucket that has 2 time tracking entries in it. So you're not ending up with actually something that's statistically significant at some point in time. And over time, it's going to be harder to manage compliance. And if you're just trying to answer the question of, hey, how much time did we spend on design? You now still have a data munging exercise to do because there's 6 proliferations of that you've created that you still need to clean up to get that answer. So always err towards larger, simpler, higher level buckets and only add complexity as it becomes evident that it's needed. And that's a really hard thing to do when you're initially designing a data schema. Everybody has the tendency to make it more complicated than it should be. It's like our number one job when we do a consulting engagement with a client is to protect them from themselves because they always want more complexity than is necessary or useful to them initially. So it's hard to do that on your own, but if you have that philosophy going in, hopefully you'll end up in the right place. Milan is physically, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
we'll go with that. Milan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I always forget how to actually use the hand thing anyway. It was like waiting for me. Hi, my name is Milan Pedapa. Our company helps improve people's lifestyles through health and fitness. So we're a health and fitness company. And this might be kind of a far-fetched question, to be honest, and technically has more 2 sides to it, but I'll start with the first. As far as small scale companies, so the company that I work for is very, very small. We have the CEO, myself as a COO, and then kind of like the people doing the main stuff. So it's very mixed. Are there a handful of things that are the specific pieces of data or the specific things we should be looking at to get data as a new company to better be profitable or better look at profitability? Because obviously you guys are talking about things that are very specific. And I'm like, we don't even have those tools. We don't even have the employees to look at those things. Right now, me and one other person are doing all of that data. And it's like, what should we choose to focus on first?
Great question. Marcel, you want to start with that?
Yes. And I have a little bit of context because Milan is my sister and these are the things we talk about over dinner. So there's 2 components to this business that I think are worth acknowledging. The first is that it's largely a recurring revenue business, but it's also a service business. It happens to be a leveraged service business, but it's still a service business. So I'm going to try to do this very briefly, and I will post some resources in the chat that can go much deeper than I can during this call. And then I will stand over your shoulder while you watch me talk to you on a computer screen, and it'll be super weird. I'm just kidding. There are a couple of important metrics. We're going to talk about financial and operational metrics. When we talk about the finances, there's a couple of important things that you need to understand from the financials of the business. So the first is agency gross income. So what is agency gross income? It's revenue minus pass-through expenses. So I'm going to explain this for the purpose of everybody else on the call. I don't know that there are a lot of pass-through expenses in this business that you're involved in, but pass-through would be money that clients give you that isn't yours. So for those of you on the call here that like maybe you run Facebook ads, if a client gives you $20,000 a month, but 15 of that goes to Facebook for the ads, it's not a $20,000 a month client. To you, it's a $5,000 a month client. Only the money that's left after you've given Facebook their share is your revenue that that you now need to earn. And that's what we need to be very, very clear on, is like, what is the money that we now need to earn with our time? That's agency gross income. Then we need to understand our delivery costs. And this is the time and expenses that go into earning that revenue. So for example, if a client pays us to build them a website, when we look at all the time that we spent designing and building and project managing and meeting with the client, and then maybe some of the software expenses that we used as tools in our tool belt to build that website, our Figma subscription, the Adobe Creative Cloud stuff, maybe we have a Canva subscription. We add all that up. That's what it costs us to get that website done. And the benchmark that we're looking for here is we generally want a 50% margin or more. So I actually need to do the opposite of this, 50% margin or more. So basically what that means is we don't want to spend more than half of every dollar a client pays us just to get the work done. Because if we do that, there's not a whole lot of cash flow left over to pay for overhead, which is generally going to be another 20 to 30% of the business. And this is going to be anywhere from 8 to 14% on sales and marketing. These ratios are very rough. It can be any combination of these things. 8 to 14% on admin, so your legal, accounting, etc. 0 to 6% on overhead if you have it, if you have an office, etc. But in total, you should be spending about 20 to 30% on overhead, which should leave you hopefully with 20% or more on profit. So this is basically at 4 numbers at a financial level that if you understand these things, then you can start to diagnose what the problem is in the business if profitability isn't where it needs to be. And 9 out of 10 times, if you have a profitability problem, the problem is here. It's that your delivery margin isn't high enough. So there's only 3 ways to move that number. I'll make this real quick. If we think about the formula for this, it's AGI minus delivery costs over AGI, right? So if you think about this, there's 2 ways to improve this metric. We can earn more money without spending more to earn it, or we can spend less to earn the same amount of money. So on an operations basis, because the problem with financial data is you're probably only going to get it once a month, and you're probably going to get it 2 or 3 weeks after the month is over, and it's going to tell you what happened in the past, but generally the latency isn't that high, and it's not going to tell you exactly why things happen the way that they did. So there's 3 numbers you can look at on a day-to-day basis that'll tell you how you're trending. Average cost per hour measures for each hour that we spend doing work on average, what does it cost us? And you can start to look at different types of work that you do, different types of people that do that work to see where are we having to utilize very expensive labor to get things done. That's a proxy for delivery cost. If you can make it less expensive on an hourly basis to earn your revenue, over time, you'll spend less on the P&L to earn your revenue. The other is average billable rate. So this looks at for every hour that we do spend earning revenue from clients, how much revenue do we earn? So if a client pays me $1,000 a month and I spend 5 hours on that, pop quiz, what's my hourly rate on this? It's pretty good. It's $200 an hour. If I spend 10 hours, I make half that. If I spend 1 hour, I make $1,000 an hour. If I charge $2,000 and spend 5, I make $400 an hour. So there's 2 ways to improve this. We either charge more money and spend the same amount of time, or we spend less time and charge the same amount of money. So efficiency at earning revenue is the second piece. And then the last one is utilization. So we pay for a bunch of time across our team. How much of it is spent actually earning that average billable rate? So these 2 metrics control revenue. So that's it. 4 numbers on your profit and loss statement, and then 3 numbers day to day in operations that will tell you if you're on track to hit those financial numbers and help you get an understanding of what levers you can pull to get better at earning revenue efficiently and have more gross margin. And if you have strong gross margin, it's much easier to have a healthy business, and you often just get to choose how much profit you want versus how much you want to push back into the table. So that would be my high level answer. If you want to go super deep on this, I will leave some resources in the chat because I could talk about this for far longer than anyone is interested in hearing about.
I will also just add that if you are a new business and 1, getting the data is overwhelming, but 2, we're just trying to get a picture of whether or not we're profitable or not, keep in mind that when you're small, you want a inflated profit margin because there's a bunch of expenses coming in your future that you don't have to pay for yet. You don't have to pay for an HR manager because your team is 2 people. You don't have to pay for legal because no one's trying to sue you, right? All of these future expenses will come as the business continues to grow and scale. And so when you're small, you want to make sure that you should have a way over 20% profit margin when you're small because you need to give yourself room to shrink. You have to give your profit room to fall as all of these new expenses come onto the map. So just a note there of like, we're optimizing for 20% at scale. If you're 20% and you're only 1 person, that's actually not a viable profit margin for scale.
It's so funny you say that because this is another criticism that I have with financial statements in the early stage of the business. They're often unreliable. Most mostly because just like founders aren't paying themselves what it would cost to hire someone else to do something. So a founder is subsidizing so many of the expenses in the business that like a profit and loss statement that's cash based, that's you're filing taxes based on, it's not even a real reflection of the operating model of the business. So be very weary of that.
Right. You might be doing all of your own sales and you're not paying yourself commission. Your model needs to be able to handle 10% to a future salesperson. Even if you're not paying that person yet, the model needs to have enough room to bring that person in.
Correct. Yeah. So this is the value of having a partner that can take a management accounting lens and help augment your understanding of your books with this more abstracted thing. So Laura, for example, who's on the call, has gone through our course and our materials. So that would be an example of someone who has the context to be able to have that more nuanced conversation.
Keegan, before we get to your question, I want to make sure, does anybody else have a question? Speak now, raise hands.
All right. The wood goes
Keegan.
to the eager beaver.
Take it away.
Take it away, Keegan.
Hi, I'm Keegan. I still help remodelers close more deals. No, I don't want to take too much time, but this might be outside of the scope of this call. But how do you go about determining whether you should increase AGI or decrease delivery costs? Or basically, how do you determine your prices in so many words?
How do you determine your prices? Those are kind of two very different questions, actually. Could you maybe talk a little bit more?
Yeah.
I want to try to understand the psyche behind this. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's say you do determine that you have a profitability problem, or you just want to get a better idea. Maybe this goes back to just starting with the plan, figuring out the plan first, and then actually figuring out the profitability. But do you have a framework for determining if the model is flawed or if you need to start increasing AGI or decreasing delivery cost? Does that make sense?
We have a software platform that we haven't really been talking a whole lot about in public, but we've been rolling it out quietly to some clients. And just this week, we decided, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if we offered a free trial of this to some people? So because you all carved time out of your day to be here, I'm going to leave a link in the chat here shortly.
I love this.
That you can use to go get 90 days of free access to this software platform. And it's going to come with a video that explains how to use it. And it will create this plan, this model of your business. And it will allow you to actually just start playing with these things. Like, well, what if we increased our price by 10 or 20%? What if we rearranged our team so we could have a slightly higher utilization rate? What if we adjusted our budgets? What if we lowered the labor costs that we had? And see the impact that that has. And you'd be alarmed at how very small incremental changes have a huge impact on the model of your business, because the reality is there isn't a blanket answer for this. If you are based in San Francisco and a junior project manager costs you 160 grand a year, well, lowering your labor costs is probably a very real opportunity for you. But if you started your agency by hiring virtual assistants in the Philippines and paying them $8 an hour, then there's very little upside for you in that strategy. It's nuanced, and that's where the context that you have and your, frankly, belief and conviction that a change can happen also has a material impact outside of objectively how feasible it is, because it needs to get executed, and your belief and conviction is a strong component in that. But having a tool to visualize the impact, I think, is the first step, so that you can get a grip on what are all the different ways in which I can achieve the outcome that I want, and then determine for yourself, which of these do I feel confident I can go and execute on. So I'm going to turn it over to Jhana while I go digging for that link so I can make sure I get it in the chat. But that would be my high level answer for you, Keith, on this.
Guys, can we show Marcel some love for this early access? I am personally super excited for this. Thank you, Marcel. This is amazing. What I will say, to just double click on your question here, Keegan, is that increasing price is the only lever that you can pull in your business that doesn't cost you anything, right? You just increase price and there it is. It's increased. It takes the 5 seconds to swap out your Stripe link, right? So every other change in this business will require an investment of some sort. It will require time or energy to replace team members with cheaper team members. It will require your operators time to make things more efficient or to lower delivery costs. Everything else will cost something. Now, that doesn't mean don't do it, but it does mean that if you have the opportunity to increase price, if you think your market will accept that, then that was always and by far the easiest lever to pull within the business, because it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Guys, make sure you grab that free trial. That software platform. I just downloaded it. That's amazing. I think we got time for one more question.
This stuff is so beta that literally somebody on my team is going to have an Asana task assigned to them when you fill out this form to manually go and create an account for you. So it's going to take a couple of days. That's how early we are with this. And I just want to second what Jhana just said, which is like, all things being equal, to start with raising your price. I want to acknowledge that a lot of people in our industry make it sound like your mindset is the only thing stopping you from raising your price, and you just need to go do ayahuasca in the Peruvian jungle and like remove your limiting beliefs and all of a sudden the pizza shop down the street will pay you 100 grand for a logo. That's fucking bullshit. But most people are undercharging. That is true. But if you believe or know that that is actually a constraint, you've gone down that path, you're now at a point where you're reaching diminishing returns, then a more nuanced approach is probably necessary. But I would agree. Most of us, we probably could just raise our price and it would be fine.
One more question, guys. Someone feeling brave? Because Keegan's got another one.
Man, Keegan, you're locked and loaded
Laura,
today, man.
Rachel, Mark.
No. All right, Keegan, take it away.
Go for it, Keegan.
Let's do it.
Thanks for being here, Keegan. All right.
I want to go back to the satellite, helicopter, microscope levels that you were talking about. The example that you said made sense, but I was thinking, are there any other examples that you can give of key metrics for agencies in particular at those 3 different levels?
Every metric, to some extent, can be broken down. Some metrics, like let's say profit is pretty exclusively a satellite level metric, right? It's the top line for the business as a whole. It's an executive level metric. But when it comes to departmental performance, pretty much every department will have a North Star that can be broken down into leading indicators that serve at the helicopter and microscope. I'm just going to rant a couple of these and then feel free to stop me. For sales, a microscope level metric might be conversion rate of qualified leads. That's your individual closer who is responsible for their individual conversion rate on the qualified leads that they talk to. At the helicopter level, that is conversion rate average for the department. So all closers need to, on average, be meeting a certain target when it comes to conversion rate. Your top performing closers will be above it. Your bottom performing closers will be below it. And you as a manager need to know that so that you can make sure that the team as a whole is performing within KPI and you can manage up the underperformers to continuously increase growth there. And then satellite level, this would be conversion rate on leads coming from paid ads versus referrals, right? This is where the head of sales and the CMO need to get together to talk about, are we converting the most number of people from this lead source versus this lead source, or from this script versus this script, or if they go through an appointment center versus not, right? Those are department level conversations, executive level decisions that need to be made that will restructure how the company and the team runs. So again, the data point is the same. It's just conversion rate, but it's how you aggregate it and how you analyze it and display it that will answer a different level question. Maybe that's the better way to put it, Keegan. It's not the raw data point that changes. It's the context and the question that you ask that data to answer for you.
I'll augment this. We generally think about this in terms of vertical and horizontal segmentation. So vertical segmentation would be, what is our average billable rate for the whole business? The whole agency had an ABR of X. And then one level down from that might be, what was our average billable rate by type of service? So our websites had an ABR of X, SEO had an ABR of Y, digital marketing had an ABR of whatever. And then another vertical segmentation that's more detailed would be specific clients. And you might even go to specific phases within a specific client. So as you get to the lower level, you're just talking about more granular segmentations. And then time horizons are also another vector over which you might start to get more specific. So at ABR at the executive level might be the whole agency for the whole month. Whereas at the precise level, it might be by client, by week, for example. So those two things, they apply to each of these. These can all scale horizontally and vertically. The only difference is how frequently can you measure the two inputs to each metric. So for average cost per hour, it's payroll and hours. For average billable rate, it's revenue and hours worked. For utilization, it's capacity and hours. So whatever segments, this comes down to like what data is structured and unstructured. But the two vectors we think about is vertical. So what segments of the business, and horizontal, what is the time horizon over which we're measuring this?
That makes a lot more sense.
Helpful?
Thank you.
I want to give some spirit fingers to Keegan, to Milan.
Keegan, man.
The triple questions. Should have named you a co-host on this webinar. It's plug time. I've left a link to the form in the chat. I've also left a link to our agency profitability toolkit in case any of you have not consumed that yet. If you want to go much, much, much deeper on all the things that we talked about today, there's a ton of free stuff in there as well. And Jhana, you've got a ton of free resources out there. Where should people go to get more of your stuff?
Yep, I actually want to hook you guys up. I will grab this link right now, but we've talked so much around how to drive profit through team utilization and maximizing the efficiency and productivity of your team. So I want to give you my 2X productivity output guide. And these are some of the tactical, operational, actionable things that you can do tomorrow to start increasing the productivity of your team. So I should have been prepared with this, and I will have this for you in just a moment.
All good. I have one last thing that I think I need to say out loud, which is John and I just announced on Monday privately in Jhana's group that we have an official partnership now. So we launched a course recently, and now if you become a client of Jhana's, you're going to get access to that course at no cost. So for those of you that have been considering working with Jhana to train operations leadership inside your organization and or hire operations leadership, there's a pretty sweet deal now that's included with that, where they're also going to get access to our best in class training to be thinking about this part of your business on your behalf as well. So just want to make that clear. And Jhana's awesome. So please go talk to her if that's something you need in your business. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. Your time is so valuable. I'm so honored that you took some of it to be here with us. So thank you, and Godspeed, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. This was fun. Appreciate y'all showing up. See y'all later.